She hides in an abandoned cabin to avoid her ex until the mafia boss knocks on her door. The gravel of the fire road was a specific, terrible sound, a crunching under the tires that meant they were getting further away from everything Stella Turner knew. She was 29 years old, until 3 days ago. Her biggest concern had been hospital budgets and the spreadsheets she managed as a financial coordinator for Port Azure Private Hospital. Now, she was a fugitive. In the passenger seat, her niece, Lily, slept fitfully. Lily was 13, the daughter of Stella's late sister, and legally her ward. Stella had snatched her from soccer practice with a thin lie about a family emergency. The truth was too complex that Stella knew Caleb Rourke, her ex-boyfriend, was an expert at leveraging children to break women. He would use Lily to get to her. They had driven through the night, abandoning their phones in a truck stop dumpster 2 states over. They were heading to the one place Stella could think of that was truly off the grid, a derelict hunting cabin on Blackwater Ridge that had belonged to her great-grandfather. It was the kind of place so forgotten. She prayed no one would think to look for it. The cabin smelled of damp, mice, and decades of dust. When Stella forced the door open, a cloud of stale air hit her, but it was shelter. As Lily curled up in the only armchair, wrapped in a musty blanket, Stella went to work. She used the roll of duct tape from their meager survival kit to tape the windows, not to keep the cold out, but to create an alarm. If the glass broke, it would tear rather than shatter silently. She unspooled the thin bell wire she had brought, stringing it across the porch with empty tin cans. They were tricks Caleb himself had taught her, back when he was the charming, protective agent from the Federal Crime Control Bureau, or FCCB. Back before she had accidentally downloaded the secret payment ledger, the file had proven it all her ex-boyfriend was using the authority of his badge to provide cover for a massive narcotics ring, moving product through shell companies disguised as medical suppliers. Now she had to be better at his own games. Aunt Stella. Lily's voice was small from the chair. Why is Uncle Caleb bad? Stella froze, her hand on a window latch. She had no answer. How could she explain that the man who had claimed to love her, the one who had helped her grieve her sister, was the same man who had signed the federal arrest warrant, now painting her as a dangerous criminal? A part of her was still in shock. The third night arrived with a freezing rain. They had eaten the last of the canned beans, and the cabin's dampness had sunk into their bones. Stella was huddled by the cold fireplace, the old shotgun across her lap. When the sound came, it was not the rain. It was the crunch of tires on the gravel road below. Headlights cut a sharp, white slash across the cabin's interior, a black, expensive-looking SUV, not a police cruiser, not Caleb's truck. "Lily, the cupboard, now!" Stella hissed. She dragged her niece from the chair and shoved her into the small, musty pantry, pushing her behind sacks of long, petrified flour. "Do not make a sound. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" Lily nodded, her eyes wide with terror. Stella shut the door, cocked the heavy shotgun, and moved to stand beside the main entrance. Hidden by the shadows, the SUV's engine cut, plunging the clearing back into silence. Then, footsteps on the wooden porch. They were heavy, unhurried. A knock landed on the door. Not the frantic banging of a raid, nor the polite tap of a lost hiker. It was 3 solid, measured thumps, the knock of a man who believed he owned the space he was in. A deep voice cut through the wood, calm and resonant. "Open the door, girl. This isn't your storm shelter." Stella pressed her eye to a crack in the doorframe. Leveling the barrel of the shotgun, she saw a man, tall and broad, wearing a dark wool coat that shed the rain. His face was sharp, and his eyes, even in the gloom, looked like black ice. 2 equally large men stood behind him, silent sentinels. "Vito Romano," the man said, as if introducing himself at a dinner party. He was not looking at the door. He was looking at the small, quivering barrel of the shotgun she was pointing through the crack. "This cabin is part of my network. Get off this property." Stella's voice shook, but she held the gun steady. "I will shoot." The man, Vito, did not step back. He moved with a liquid speed that defied his size. He didn't break the door down. He simply tilted his body slightly, his left hand snapping out. He didn't grab the barrel. He deflected it. A sharp, precise twist of his wrist, and the shotgun was ripped from her grasp before her finger could even find the trigger. The force of it sent her stumbling back. This was not a bureaucrat. This was not Caleb's world of warrants and procedure. This was physical, immediate, and utterly controlled. Vito Romano pushed the door open. Stepping inside, he held her great-grandfather's shotgun loosely in one hand, his cold eyes taking in the room, the single chair, the panicked mess of their escape, and as Stella's world narrowed to this new, terrifying man. Her eyes were drawn past him, through the open door, far down the slope, winding its way up the same gravel road, was a second set of headlights. She knew that truck. A Ford pickup with a Federal light bar. It was Caleb. The man in front of her was an unknown danger. But the man coming up the hill was the devil she knew. Suddenly, Vito Romano was her only chance of surviving the next 5 minutes. Vito Romano stepped fully into the cabin, his presence sucking the remaining air from the small room. He ignored the shotgun now resting in his grip, his gaze sweeping the floor, the walls, the ceiling. He was methodical. His eyes stopped on the fireplace mantel, and he ran 2 fingers along the underside of the rough-hewn wood. He frowned. With a precise motion, he ripped a small black disc from the timber. A beacon. "He's already tagged the location," Vito said, his voice a low vibration of annoyance. He crushed the small device in his fist. This was supposed to be his most secure drop point in the Northern Territory. Stella, still reeling from the speed of his disarmament, tried to find her footing. "I don't know who you are," she lied, her voice thin. "We were just looking for shelter from the storm." Vito didn't honor the lie with his attention. He was still looking at the crushed beacon. Stella Turner. "You're the financial coordinator who flagged the Port Azure Medical Fund payments last month. That flag forced my Romano shipping group to reroute 3 containers." His gaze finally locked onto hers, cold and assessing. "I remember." It wasn't the obsessive stare of a stalker. It was the calculated appraisal of a businessman. He knew her not because he wanted her, but because she had cost him money. "We're staying here," Stella insisted, taking a half step toward the pantry. "If I leave," Vito said flatly, cutting her off. "The man in that truck arrives. A man who uses federal authority. He's the type to set up snipers on the ridge." He glanced at the thin cabin walls. "You and the child won't survive the night." As if summoned, the pantry door creaked open. Lily peeked out, her face pale. "Aunt Stella?" Vito's eyes flickered to the girl, then back to Stella. He saw the bond. He knew instantly she couldn't, run alone. The calculation was done. "Get in my car," he ordered. "And the cabin?" Stella asked, her mind racing. "This is all we have." "The cabin," Vito said, turning to the man at his shoulder, "is compromised." He tossed the man a heavy-duty lighter. "Burn it. We'll cut off his trace at the source." Stella felt a wave of nausea. Her great-grandfather's cabin, her only sanctuary. But she also saw the cold, brutal logic. The beacon meant Caleb knew exactly where they were. They were moved quickly, not asked. The 2 men hustled them outside and into the back of the armored black SUV. The leather was cold, the interior smelling faintly of ozone and cigar smoke. As the vehicle lurched forward, Stella looked back. The flames were already catching the dry porch wood, orange light eating the shadows. They had just reached the main fire road when Caleb's truck, lights flashing, screeched to a halt, blocking the path. Stella Turner, his voice, amplified by a megaphone, blasted through the trees. "This is Special Agent Rourke. Step out of the vehicle with your hands up. You are harboring a fugitive." Stella flinched. But Vito, sitting in the passenger seat ahead of her, didn't even turn around. He simply raised one hand in a casual signal. The second SUV in their convoy, which had been following them, didn't slow down. It veered slightly, accelerated, and struck the rear axle of Caleb's pickup. It was not a high-speed collision. It was a precise, tactical push. Metal shrieked as the pickup's back end was forced off the road, the front wheels sliding helplessly into the deep, muddy ditch. It was neutralized in seconds. The convoy didn't stop. They simply drove around the disabled truck, inside the SUV. The silence was heavy, the armor plating muting the sound of the rain and Caleb's distant, furious shouts. Lily, in the seat beside Stella, was pressed against the window, her eyes wide, watching the red and blue lights disappear. She was half terrified, half mesmerized. "I won't trade one captor for another," Stella said, her voice shaking but hard. "I don't want to be involved with the Mafia." Vito finally turned his head, looking at her in the darkness of the cabin. The dashboard lights cast sharp shadows across his face. "You're already involved with something worse than the Mafia," he said, his voice quiet. "You're involved with a man who uses a government seal to do his dirty work. I only have men and money." He let the statement hang in the air. "Choose." The weight of the choice pressed down on her. There was no third option. Vito picked up a satellite phone. His conversation was brief, his voice carrying the easy authority of command. "Owen, activate the Kingsbridge shield, full lockdown. I don't want to see a single uniform in the district tonight." He was ensuring their safety before she had even agreed to it. They drove for nearly 3 hours, swapping the dense forest for the urban decay and industrial arteries of New Jersey. They finally slowed, approaching a massive iron-fenced perimeter. A sign read, "Romano Pier." It was not a home, it was a fortress, a sprawling compound built from a reclaimed shipping terminal. Massive steel gates slid open, and the SUV drove into a brightly lit courtyard. The gates shut behind them with a heavy, final thud, the sound echoing in the night. Golden light spilled from the glass and steel structure in the center, washing over the black SUV. Stella had crossed a line. She was officially in his world. The Romano Pier was not a home. It was a self-contained city-state. As Vito led them inside, Stella saw it was an immaculate conversion of an old shipping terminal. What might have been a rusting warehouse was now a 3-story marvel of black steel and glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private marina where sleek, dark yachts bobbed gently. On the roof, a massive greenhouse glowed with an internal light, a square of summer against the cold New Jersey sky. Men in dark work uniforms, looking more like high-end dock workers than bodyguards, patrolled the perimeter with an unsettling lack of urgency. They didn't need to rush. The towering iron fence and the river at their back made the place a fortress. They were met inside by 2 people who represented the 2 sides of Vito's world. The first was a small, older Cuban woman with hair pulled into a severe gray bun. Her name was Senora Maris. She looked Stella and Lily up and down, her dark eyes a mixture of assessment and a strange, maternal pity. She spoke softly, ordering baths, hot food, and clean clothes, her kindness feeling like another form of control. The second was a man who seemed carved from ice. He was younger, perhaps 30, with pale hair and eyes so light they were almost colorless. Vito introduced him simply, "This is Owen Creed. He runs my security, both digital and physical." Owen Creed nodded once, his eyes not on Stella, but on the small, damp bag she clutched. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a tech CEO, but with a coldness that suggested he was capable of far worse things than any street enforcer. "They need to be cleared," Vito said. Within an hour, a private doctor, a sharp-looking man with a black medical bag who asked no questions, had examined them both in a sterile, modern guest suite. He checked Lily's vitals and gave Stella a salve for a rope burn on her palm she hadn't even noticed. It was systematic, efficient, and impersonal. This was not impulsive protection, it was a procedure. After they were dressed and clean, simple clothes provided by Maris, they were brought to Vito's office. It was a glass box hanging over the river, the lights of the city glittering like a distant, forbidden promise. Owen Creed stood by a bank of servers. "The hard drive," he said. It was not a question. Stella's hand went to the drive, now tucked in her pocket. This was her only leverage. "Before I give you this, I have conditions." Vito, who had been standing by the window, turned. His face was unreadable. "Lily!" Stella said, her voice stronger than she felt. She needs online schooling. She needs to be allowed in that garden on the roof. She needs to see the sun. Done, Vito said. Stella took a breath. And me, I am your guest. I am not to be used as a bargaining chip. My body is not part of any deal. I am not for trade. She expected him to laugh, or to argue, or to make a crude remark. Caleb would have. Instead, Vito simply held her gaze. He nodded slowly. Here, you are a guest, he agreed, his voice low. But a guest who is being hunted, the rules of the outside world don't apply. Owen set up the school access. Stella pulled the hard drive from her pocket and placed it on the polished concrete desk. Owen plugged it into his terminal. Within moments, images filled a large screen, transaction ledgers, shipping manifests. And finally, a grainy, time-stamped video from a hospital security camera. It showed Caleb Rourke in his federal agent's windbreaker, accepting a heavy black suitcase from a man Stella didn't recognize. That's it, Stella whispered. That's the proof he was taking payoffs. Vito watched the screen, his expression hardening. This is what I needed, he said, almost to himself. He's not just using the FCCB to cover his own tracks. He's using it to move against my port. That night, Stella was given a secure satellite phone to make one call. She called the only lawyer she had ever trusted, a woman from her old life. The news was bad. Stella, where are you? The lawyer's voice was frantic. Caleb put out a nationwide warrant. It's not just the local FCCB. He's looped in the Federal Medical Crime Inspectorate. They're painting you as a disgruntled employee who stole proprietary data and absconded with millions. Millions, Stella felt sick. There was no money. It doesn't matter. He's also charging you with kidnapping. He's saying you abducted your own niece. After the call ended, Stella sat in the dark. She was no longer just running. She was being erased, rewritten as a villain. Vito found her in the common room, staring at the dark river. He didn't speak, just motioned to a screen. He played a new video. It was drone footage, heat signature based. It showed the smoking ruins of the cabin. A figure was walking through the embers, kicking at the debris, visible even through the heat scan as a man consumed by rage. Caleb. He knows you're alive, Vito said quietly. He didn't find bodies. He won't stop. It was a statement of fact, but it felt like a shackle, binding her to this luxurious, cold pier. The days blurred into a strange routine. Lily, with the resilience of youth, began to adapt. She loved the basement, which had been converted into a state-of-the-art game room. But more than that, she loved the marina. She would sit for hours, watching the massive container ships be guided in by Romano tugboats. Stella felt a pang of both relief and profound guilt. Her niece was safe, but she was becoming accustomed to a world of powerful, dangerous men. Late one night, Stella and Lily fell asleep on a large sofa in the main atrium, lulled by the hum of the compound's servers and the sound of the river. From his private balcony 2 floors above, Vito Romano watched them. He had never allowed outsiders to sleep in the heart of his operation. He had never brought a child into this world. He watched the way Stella's hand remained on Lily's shoulder even in sleep, a guardian's posture. He saw vulnerability, but he also saw a spine of steel that had kept them alive for 3 days in the woods, and for the first time in a long time. The cold calculation in his eyes was joined by something else, something he had not permitted himself to feel. He was turning to go inside when a red light flashed on his personal terminal. Owen Creed's voice came through the intercom, sharp and low. "Boss, we have a problem. I just caught a ping. An active trace attempt from a secured FCCB server. It's bypassing our outer walls. He's already here." A strange, quiet domesticity settled over them. The Romano pier, for all its cold steel and armed guards, developed a rhythm. Mornings began in the industrial kitchen, a vast stainless steel space where Stella and Lily ate breakfast, looking out at the gray river. Afternoons were spent in the rooftop greenhouse, a humid, green sanctuary where Lily worked on her online school assignments. Evenings found Stella in Vito's library, a room walled in glass that overlooked the entire compound, reading books from his extensive collection. It was a life of impossible peace for a woman on the run, a gilded cage that felt safer than any freedom she had known. Vito was not always present, but his influence was... He was a creature of disciplined routine. One evening, he found her in the library, looking at a framed photo of an older woman in a nun's habit. "My namesake," he said, his voice quiet, making her jump. He stood near the doorway, not crowding her. Her name was Rosa Romano. She was an Italian nun who ran the foster home I grew up in. She gave me her last name because she said I deserved a strong one. Stella looked at him, surprised by the crack in his armor. "She raised you. She and the state did," he said. A flicker of an old bitterness in his eyes. He motioned toward the window, in the direction of the mountains they had left. That cabin. The one at Blackwater Ridge. It was hers, from her family. She used to meet a state trooper there, a good one. Gave him information to put away the men who hurt the kids in her parish. He turned his gaze back to Stella. "That's why I don't like finding federal bugs in my property." "It's a desecration." The admission settled between them, heavy and real. Stella began to understand. Vito Romano was not the type of mafia boss she saw in movies, all pinstripes and flashy Italian restaurants. He was a man of the port. He dealt in logistics, warehouse chains, and the complex, gritty business of port security. He was modern, practical, and in his own way, utterly ruthless. She saw this pragmatism in how he treated Lily. After a week, Lily was growing restless, her 13-year-old energy bouncing off the walls of the luxurious compound. She kept staring at the small skiffs the dock crew used. One afternoon, Stella watched from the window as Vito himself took Lily down to the docks. He spoke to a gruff-looking foreman, and 10 minutes later, Lily was wearing an oversized life jacket, her hands on the tiller of a small boat, a massive grin on her face as one of the crew guided her through a simple circuit in the protected marina. Stella watched, her heart a tight knot of conflicting emotions. She saw her niece, who had lost her mother and then her home, laugh for the first time in weeks. The void of a family, of a stable male figure, was being filled by this man who burned down cabins and ran a criminal empire. The next day, Vito found Stella in the library again. "You need to learn to protect yourself," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. He took her to the basement, past the game room, to a concrete-walled shooting range. The air was cold and smelled of gunpowder and oil. He laid a simple, modern handgun on the table. It was smaller than the shotgun from the cabin. "I know how to shoot," Stella said, her voice betraying her memory of the cabin. "You know how to point," he corrected. "You don't know how to use it." He made her stand, adjusting her feet. He was patient, methodical, like a professor. "Your stance is wrong. You'll break your own wrist." He stepped behind her. He was close, but not touching. "Not yet. Raise your arms." She did, her hands shaking as she held the gun. "Relax your shoulders." His voice was low, right by her ear. She felt the warmth of his breath against the skin of her neck, a stark contrast to the cold air. A shiver ran down her spine, a sensation so alien she almost dropped the weapon. It was the first time in over a year she had felt a man's proximity as anything other than a threat. "You're anticipating the recoil," he said. He placed one large hand over hers on the grip, his other hand settling lightly on her back, between her shoulder blades. "Breathe. Feel the weight." His touch was firm, grounding. It wasn't sexual. It was instructional. And that, somehow, made it more intimate. Her skin prickled where his hand rested. She was acutely aware of his chest against her back, the solid wall of him. She took a breath, and it smelled of him clean wool, faint cigar, and something metallic, like the river. "Caleb was gentle, too," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Before he wasn't—" Vito was silent for a long moment. His hand did not move. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say, "I'm not him." When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't need you to be compliant, Stella. I don't care if you're good. I need you to look me in the eye and still be here." The words struck her harder than a physical blow. Caleb had wanted obedience. Vito was demanding her presence. her full-throated, clear-eyed choice. The shot she fired was loud, but his words were louder, echoing in the confined space. It was in that moment of raw, suspended tension that the intercom buzzed. Owen Creed's voice cut through. "Boss, we have a problem. An anonymous message just breached the firewall." Vito stepped back, the warmth leaving her instantly. He hit a switch, and the large monitor on the wall lit up. It was a photograph. Stella's blood ran cold. It was Lily, taken that morning. Walking on the pier with her life jacket, the photo was high resolution. Clearly taken with a long-range lens from across the river. Caleb had eyes on them. He was in the city. Vito's entire demeanor shifted. The teacher, the confidant, vanished, replaced by the port boss. He hit the intercom. "Lock down the pier. No one in or out without my personal authorization. Double the perimeter, and get Stella a full-time escort. She and the girl are not to be left alone for 1 second." That night, Stella lay awake. Lily sleeping soundly in the bed next to her. The compound was silent, but it was the silence of a fortress bracing for a siege. This was no longer a temporary shelter. It was a front line, and she was forced to admit the terrifying, impossible truth. She felt safer, more protected, lying in the heart of a mafia boss's stronghold than she ever had in her own home with a federal agent. The next morning, the world ended. Stella was in the kitchen when Senora Maris silently turned on a small television on the counter. Caleb's face filled the screen. He was wearing his official FCCB jacket, standing in front of a podium, a bank of microphones pointed at him. He looked like a hero, grieved, professional, and concerned. "A tragic situation," he was saying. Stella Turner, a financial coordinator at Port Azure, is believed to have embezzled over $2 million from a hospital charity fund. We also believe she has abducted her niece, 13-year-old Lily Scott, and is armed and unstable. Stella's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the tile. He had done it. He had neatly and efficiently rewritten their reality, painting himself as the rescuer and her as the villain. The news anchor cut back in, reporting that Agent Rourke was now heading a joint task force with the Bureau of Interstate Crime Suppression, or BICS. Federal search warrants had been issued for all of Miss Turner's known addresses, including a remote cabin on Blackwater Ridge that had mysteriously burned to the ground just hours before agents arrived. The news report was a declaration of war, and it sent a shockwave through the compound. Later that morning, Stella was walking past the main conference room when she heard raised voices. She pressed herself into an alcove, listening. "Too much heat. Vito," a man's voice said. "The feds, Bix. This isn't a shipping dispute. This is a federal manhunt landing on our doorstep. Give them the girl. We cut a deal. We give them the drive, not the girl," another voice argued. "They want both. You saw the news. He's framed her. This is his personal vendetta." There was a heavy silence, and then a sound that shook the wall, Vito's hand slamming flat on the glass table. "No," Vito's voice was low, lethal, and final. "We don't hand over women to men who hit them, ever. End of discussion." Stella covered her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Caleb had always demanded payment for his protection, her compliance, her silence, her body. Here, a man she barely knew, a criminal, was defending her honor in a way no one ever had, simply because it was his rule. She slid down the wall, tears of a strange, painful relief running down her face. The pressure mounted from the outside to Lily. Desperate for a connection to her old life, had used her school laptop to message an old friend. The reply came an hour later. "Lily, this is weird," the friend wrote. "That Agent Rourke guy was at our school. He was asking all of us where you would go if you were scared. He told Mrs. Geller you were at risk. It was creepy." Stella showed the message to Vito. The cold fury returned to his eyes. Without a word, he personally escorted Lily from her guest room to a different part of the compound. He led them to a solid steel door that opened into what looked like a high-end basement game room, complete with a soda fountain and every console. "This is the safest room on the pier," he told Lily, his voice gentle. It has its own air supply and a dedicated network. The connection is faster here. Anyway, he was shielding Lily from the panic, disguising a safe room as a privilege. That afternoon, Vito made a move. "We're going out," he said to Stella. "You're with me. Owen is staying with Lily." A black sedan, not the armored SUV, took them deep into the city to a quiet, old-world restaurant. They were ushered into a private room where 3 older men sat, smoking. This was a meeting of an allied family. Vito was trading information. Stella was forced to sit and listen as they spoke in a language of coded respect and implied violence. They were discussing Caleb, the hard drive, and the disrespect of a federal agent targeting their shared port. Stella realized she was watching a different kind of government in action, one with its own laws. They agreed to help, but on one condition: no one touched a child or a woman who was not in the game. Vito assured them Stella was under his seal of protection. It was like a royal decree. On the drive back, it happened, a sharp crack, and the car swerved violently. The rear tire had been shot out. "Down!" Vito yelled. He didn't wait for her to obey. His arm hooked around her, pulling her from her seat and onto the floor of the car as he threw his own body over hers. He was heavy, solid, and he shielded her completely. The car skidded to a halt, and his men were out, returning fire into the darkness of an overpass. Stella was trapped beneath him, her face pressed into his coat. He smelled of expensive wool, gunpowder, and the faint, clean scent of the river. In that moment of terror, one thought cut through. This man at least protected her with his own body. They made it back, but the attack had broken something in her. That night, she woke up screaming, thrashing in the sheets, her mind trapped in a memory. Caleb, his hand twisting her wrist, her shoulder slamming against the drywall of their old apartment, his voice hissing in her ear. "You don't get to question my money. Stella, you don't get to question me." The door to her room opened. Vito stood in the frame, backlit by the hallway light. He had clearly been sleeping. He wore only sweatpants and his torso was bare, covered in the faint lines of old scars. He saw her, clutching her wrist, tears streaming down her face. He didn't comfort her. He didn't smile. He walked over, his eyes on her hand. "He did this." She nodded. He knelt in front of her. "Give me your hand." She flinched but obeyed. He took her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Next time he touches you," he said, his voice a low growl, "you don't pull back. You drive your thumb into the nerve here." He pressed a spot on his own wrist. "Then you break it. You collapse the joint like this." He demonstrated the counter move, a reverse wrist break, guiding her hand through the motion in the air. He was not teaching her to be safe. He was teaching her to be lethal. The final blow came an hour later. Owen Creed appeared at her door. "Vito needs you." In the command center, a new video played on the screen. It was Caleb, in his office, looking directly into a webcam. "Hello, Vito," he said. "You think you're safe? You're not." He held up a file. "This is evidence that the Romano Syndicate moved a container of automatic weapons through your port 3 months ago. A federal offense. Bix would love to see this." He smiled. "You have 72 hours. Stella and my hard drive, on my terms, or your entire operation gets shut down, and you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison." The video ended. The room was silent. Vito stared at the blank screen, his jaw working. He had been outmaneuvered. Caleb was using both sides, the law and the criminal underworld, against him. Finally, Vito turned to Stella. His eyes were dark, not with defeat, but with a terrible, clarifying resolve. "We won't let him use the law to strangle us," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll use the truth to burn him." That night, the call came. Vito summoned her to the greenhouse on the roof. The air inside was thick, humid, and alive with the smell of damp earth and sharp, clean mint. Below them, the Romano Pier was a self-contained island of light, and beyond that, the river was a vast, black void. The sky was overcast, pressing down on them. "He gave me 72 hours, Vito said. He stood by the glass, not looking at her, watching his perimeter. That means his timeline is accelerating. He's desperate. He finally turned, his eyes catching the dim green glow of the grow lights. "Tell me exactly what is on that drive. Not the highlights, everything." Stella took a breath, the damp air filling her lungs. The video of Caleb taking the suitcase from the Black Harbor Collective, the transaction logs, and she hesitated. And what? An audio file. I think he recorded it by mistake, on his phone. He's talking to someone, bragging. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's bragging that he had to clean up a nurse at Port Azure who saw the real manifests. He said she was a loose end, a nurse who disappeared 2 months ago. Vito's jaw tightened. What else? Documents. Internal FCCB memos. He used his authority to plant 3 men in your port. They're on your payroll. He used the FCCB to get them security clearance. Vito turned back to the glass, a muscle working in his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but more dangerous than if he had yelled. So he's using the state to infiltrate my business and using a criminal outfit to finance his operation. He let out a short, cold laugh. He played the government and he played the mafia. Good. We'll let him drown in both. The words were still hanging in the air when the entire compound was plunged into a screaming red light. An alarm wailed, high and piercing. Strobe lights on the perimeter fence began to flash, painting the greenhouse in rhythmic, bloody waves. "What is that?" Stella cried, her hands flying to her ears. Vito was already moving, grabbing her arm. "Owen, talk to me!" He snapped into his phone. Owen's voice was tight, all business. "Raid. Boss Main Gate. They're FCCB, a full tactical unit. They're claiming a federal warrant to search for a fugitive. They're coming in hard." "It's him," Stella breathed, a new panic seizing her. "They're not here to arrest me," Vito snarled, whine, pulling her toward a service panel in the floor. "They're here for you." He ripped open the panel, revealing a dark, metal-runged ladder. "Go." He followed her down into a narrow, concrete utility tunnel. It was cold, smelling of dust and ozone, a stark contrast to the living air of the greenhouse. The only light was the pulsing red of the emergency strobes filtering through maintenance grates. Above them, they heard it. The heavy, synchronous thud of dozens of tactical boots hitting the concrete floor of the atrium. The sound broke Stella. It was the sound of the cabin, the sound of organized, malevolent power. Her legs gave out and she slid down the wall, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I can't, it's him, it's..." In an instant, Vito was there. He didn't try to pull her up. He moved behind her, pressing her back against the cold concrete, shielding her body with his own. He was a solid wall of heat. He pressed one large hand flat against her chest, over her hammering heart. His other arm braced beside her head. "Stella." His voice was a low growl, right by her ear, vibrating through her. "Look at me." She turned her head, her cheek scraping the rough wall. He was so close. The red light flashed, illuminating the hard planes of his face, then plunging them back into shadow. "Breathe with me," he commanded. "Now." He took a deep, deliberate breath, and she felt his chest expand against her back. "Again, they are just men. They are not him." She choked on a breath, trying to match his. The sound of the boots grew louder, directly overhead, then began to fade as the team swept toward the living quarters. They waited in the pulsing dark. The immediate danger had passed, but neither of them moved. The silence in the tunnel was deafening. The fear didn't disappear. It transformed. It coiled in the narrow space between them, twisting into a different kind of tension. Adrenaline and proximity. Stella was still gasping, but her heart was hammering against his hand. She could feel his own heartbeat, slow and steady, a thudding baseline beneath the panic. She was hyper-aware of his hand on her chest, the heat of it searing through her shirt. She was aware of his thigh pressed against hers, the solid muscle. She tilted her head, looking up at him. His eyes were fixed on her, but they weren't cold. They were dark, entirely. Consumed by a suppressed hunger that mirrored her own, the raid, the fear, the low vibration of his voice, it all crested into this one unbearable moment. "Vito," she whispered. He didn't answer. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to bolt. She didn't. The kiss was not rushed. It was deep, almost agonizing, a slow burn that felt inevitable. His mouth was firm, tasting of mint and something metallic. His hand moved from her chest, sliding up her throat, his thumb tracing her jawline before tangling in her hair, tilting her head. His other hand went to the small of her back, pressing her body fully against his. An anchor in the storm. Stella's hands, which had been braced against the wall, fisted in his shirt, holding on as the world fell away. She kissed him back, a desperate, frantic answer. Their breath came hard and fast, the sound loud in the narrow tunnel, mingling with the distant, mechanical groan of a generator. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. His voice was rough, ragged. "Okay?" She couldn't find her voice. She just nodded, her fingers tightening in his shirt, and pulled him back down. They stayed like that for a long moment, the alarm still wailing distantly. Eventually, they slumped against the wall, sliding down to the cold floor, their shoulders and hips pressed together. "I've never brought anyone in here," he said, his voice raw. He stared at the red light pulsing on the far wall. "This is my way out, not a place I bring people in." It was a confession. Caleb had possessed her. Vito was sharing his escape route. For the first time, Stella felt chosen, not just claimed. The moment of fragile peace was shattered. Vito's phone vibrated, a harsh buzz against the concrete. He pulled it out, his face illuminated by the white light of the screen. His expression went from raw intimacy to cold stone in a fraction of a second. "Owen, what?" He listened, his whole body going rigid. "What do you mean? Not in the safe room?" A terrible, deafening pause. Vito surged to his feet, pulling Stella up with him. "Say that again." He angled the phone, and Owen's voice, tinny and frantic, filled the tunnel. "Boss, the raid was a diversion. It was real. They're tearing the place apart, but I checked the safe room camera feed. Lily's gone. A different team. 2 men. SWAT gear with FCCB logos, came in through the sub-level utility hatch. They didn't breach. They had a key code. They were in and out in 90 seconds. Owen was still talking, but Stella couldn't hear him. The heat that had flushed her skin from the kiss turned to ice. Her face, which had been alive and warm seconds before, was now a mask of pure, crystalline horror. The passion, the fear, all of it was instantly consumed by the cold, bottomless panic of a guardian. Caleb hadn't come for her. He had come for Lily. They were out of the tunnel in seconds, racing back to the command center. The federal raid team was already pulling out, a tactical retreat. The diversion had worked perfectly. Owen was at his desk, his face grim, as a new video feed blinked onto the main screen. It was from Caleb. The video was close up, shaky. Lily was in the back of a van, her hands bound with zip ties. She was breathing, her chest heaving, but her eyes were swollen nearly shut. Her skin was puffy and red. Stella's breath left her body. "Oh, God, no!" "What?" Vito demanded, his eyes on the screen. "Peanuts," Stella whispered, her voice cracking. "She has a severe peanut allergy. He must have done it on purpose. Look at her eyes. She's in anaphylaxis." Caleb's face appeared, his smile void of all warmth. "Shoreline Galleria," he said, his voice calm. 2 hours. You, Stella, and the hard drive, or she suffocates. Your choice." The screen went black. Vito was already moving, snapping orders. "Owen, tactical specs on the Galleria. Full team, alpha loadout. We go in hard from the roof and the sewers." "No!" Stella shrieked, grabbing his arm. It was the first time she had ever raised her voice to him. A raw, ragged sound. "You don't understand. We don't have 2 hours. She needs an EpiPen in 15 minutes. Maybe less. We go now, or she dies." Vito stopped, turning to face her. The cold fury in his eyes was met by her sheer, animal panic. "We go in your way. You're both dead," he snarled. "He'll have snipers." "I don't care about snipers, Vito. I care about her breathing." "Do you think I'll let you walk in there and die?" he roared, his voice echoing in the command center. "Do you think I'll let her die while you play soldier?" she screamed back, right in his face. The argument hung in the air, electric and painful, the raw edges of their new intimacy fraying under the strain of pure terror. "Boss," Owen interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension. He brought a three-dimensional map up on the main screen. The Shoreline Galleria was an abandoned, sprawling mall on the city's edge. "He's right about the snipers. The entire roof is a kill box. And he's not alone." Owen highlighted 3 distinct groups of thermal signatures already moving into place. "That's Caleb's federal team. They're setting up a perimeter. This," he highlighted a second group, "is the Black Harbor Collective, Zoya Krall's crew. They're inside, covering the main entrances." He pointed to a third, smaller group. "And these men, their insignia is Bix, the real ones. This isn't just an exchange. Boss, it's a net. He's planning to trap you, Stella, and the Black Harbor crew all at once, with a legitimate federal agency as his cleanup crew." Vito stared at the screen, a low curse escaping his lips. "He's going to set us all up and walk away a hero." He picked up a secure phone, making one call. He spoke in rapid, low Italian to someone he called the consigliere. The conversation was short. He hung up, his face set like granite. "The Eastport Council won't help," he said to Owen, but he was looking at Stella. "They consider this a personal, emotional matter. It's on us." He looked at Stella, his eyes holding hers. "You're right. We don't have time." He looked at Owen. "Plan B. We go in. Your way. But we go now." Stella ran to her room. She didn't waste time on tears. She moved with a desperate, focused energy. She pulled on a thick coat, but not before strapping on the thin, lightweight body armor one of Vito's men had given her after the sniper attack. She grabbed the 2 EpiPen injectors from her medical kit and shoved them into her jeans pocket. She took a spare memory card from her laptop bag, a backup of the hard drive, and slipped it into her bra. As she turned to leave, her hand brushed a small, silver chain Vito had given her, a simple pendant. He had told her to wear it, that it was a panic button. She clipped it around her neck, tucking it under her shirt. The team was assembled in the courtyard, engines running. The air was cold, smelling of diesel and the river. Vito was waiting for her by the door of the lead SUV, and he didn't speak. He just pulled her out of the light into the shadow by the door. He grabbed her arms, his grip bruising. He was checking her armor, his hands running over her shoulders, her vest, in a gesture that was both tactical and agonizingly intimate. Then he cupped her face, forcing her to look at him, his forehead pressed against hers. His voice was a low, hoarse rasp, a promise torn from his throat. "I will bring her back to you," he whispered, his eyes closed. "Or I will not be coming back." "Understood." "Understood," she whispered back, her own voice breaking, in the back of Caleb's van. Lily was fighting to breathe. Her vision was blurring. Through the swelling, she could hear him talking. He wasn't alone. There was a woman with an accent, sharp and foreign. "Give the girl to the Bix task force," Caleb was saying. "We'll say we rescued her during a sting operation. By the time they sort it out, Romano will be in federal custody for kidnapping a minor, and the girl's testimony won't matter." The woman, Zoya Krall, laughed. "And Turner? She'll be dead," Caleb said, his voice casual. "Caught in the crossfire. A tragedy." Lily tried to scream, but only a small, wheezing sound came out. The clock was ticking. In the Romano compound, the steel gates rolled open, and the convoy, 2 armored SUVs and a high-speed sedan shot out into the night, heading for the Shoreline Galleria. The convoy killed its lights 2 miles out from the Shoreline Galleria. In the dark, Vito, Owen, and Stella huddled around a glowing tablet displaying the mall's blueprints. "Owen," Vito said, his voice low and firm, "you take Alpha Team. Go in through the rear loading docks. I want light demo charges on the fire exits. Keep them fluid. No one gets boxed in." "And you?" Owen asked, gearing up. "He wants to see us," Vito said, glancing at Stella. "He wants an audience." He looked at her, his eyes checking her armor, her resolve. "We'll walk right in the front door." The Galleria was a cathedral of urban decay. The main entrance glass had been shattered long ago, and the wind whistled through the empty storefronts. The air smelled of mold, rainwater, and old grease from the defunct food court. Far in the distance, a pizza sign in a broken arcade flashed a single, erratic red pulse. There, in the center of the vast atrium, under a filthy, glass-domed skylight, Caleb Rourke waited. Lily was tied to a rolling information kiosk, a grotesque centerpiece. Her head was slumped, her breathing a horrifying, wet wheeze. She was pale, her face and eyes swollen. "Stella! Stella!" Caleb's voice echoed, abnormally loud in the empty space. He had 2 men with FCCB windbreakers flanking him, but his attention was only on her. "You traded a decorated federal agent for a common criminal, a port thug." He spread his arms, a performer playing to a crowd. "It's a tragic story, but don't worry. I'll make sure the official report says he coerced you. You were a victim, forced into his world. I'll make sure everyone knows." He was still trying to control the narrative. "The hard drive," he said, holding out his hand. Stella held it up, a small black rectangle. "It's encrypted, biometric password. It was a bluff, but a necessary one. Let me go to her. The drive first." "She can't breathe!" "Caleb!" Stella shouted, her voice cracking and echoing. "She's in anaphylaxis. She'll be dead before you even crack the encryption. Let me give her the shot. She lives. You get your drive." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He looked at the wheezing girl, then back at Stella. A dead child would complicate his story. "Fine, do it, slowly, where I can see you." Stella walked forward, her boots crunching on broken glass. Vito stayed back, his body coiled, his hands loose. He was scanning the upper levels, the dark balconies of the 2nd and 3rd floors. Stella fell to her knees beside her niece. "Lily, baby, I'm here. I'm right here." Lily's eyes barely fluttered. Stella pulled the first EpiPen from her pocket. She uncapped it, her back to Caleb, and jammed it hard into Lily's thigh, holding it there for a hard 10 count. As she did, she looked up, past the kiosk, to the 2nd floor balcony. She saw a flicker of movement in the shadows of a long-dead jewelry store. Vito, still scanning, raised his left hand by his chest. He tapped his chest twice, then pointed toward the 3rd floor. It was a silent, lethal language, a battlefield communication she only vaguely understood. "Time's up, Stella," Caleb called. Suddenly, the entire 3rd floor exploded in light. Blinding white construction floodlights slammed on, illuminating the entire atrium, turning the shadows into harsh lines. A woman's voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the air. It was sharp, accented, and full of cold amusement. "Thank you for bringing our property. Agent Rourke, we will take it from here." On the 3rd floor balcony, surrounded by a dozen men in heavy tactical gear, stood Zoya Kral, the head of the Black Harbor Collective. Caleb's face went white, then purple with rage. You stupid little boy," Zoya sneered, stepping into the light. "Did you really think we would let you, a civil servant, keep the keys to our entire operation? This deal is now ours." The first shot came from Caleb's men. The atrium exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions, Caleb's men on the ground, Zoya's men from above, and from the shadows, Vito's team. "Stella, move!" Vito roared. Stella didn't need to be told. She used a small knife to saw through the ropes binding Lily's wrists, pulling the groggy girl to the ground. She dragged her behind the solid, overturned counter of a derelict Starbucks kiosk. "Lily, stay with me." Lily was breathing better, but she was still panicked, her body fighting itself. Stella grabbed the 2nd EpiPen and drove it into her other thigh. A black-clad figure slid over the counter. Landing next to them, it was Owen. "Boss sent me." "Get her out," Stella screamed over the gunfire. "The utility tunnels get her to the cargo." Owen nodded, scooped the 13-year-old into his arms, and vanished back into the smoke and chaos, freed from her one paralyzing responsibility. Stella looked up. Vito was in the open, using a concrete planter as cover, exchanging fire not with Caleb, but with Zoya's team on the balcony. "Vito Romano," Zoya screamed, firing a machine pistol at him, chips of concrete exploding from his cover. "You still owe me for Baltimore. You pig. You breached the contract!" "Zoya," Vito yelled back, firing a controlled burst that made her duck. You were always sloppy. This was more than a deal gone wrong. It was personal. In the crossfire, Stella saw Caleb. He wasn't fighting. He was running. He saw her alone behind the counter, and his eyes lit up. This was not the plan, but he was an opportunist. He lunged, grabbing her by the vest and her hair, yanking her to her feet. "You're coming with me," he hissed. He wasn't trying to fight. He was dragging her, using her body as a shield, pulling her toward the black, gaping entrance of the abandoned multiplex cinema at the far end of the atrium. He needed new leverage. "Vito." Stella screamed, clawing at his hand. Vito heard her. He turned, his fight with Zoya instantly forgotten. He saw Caleb dragging her, and he broke cover, sprinting across the open atrium. "No!" Zoya shrieked. Seeing her enemy run, she raised her weapon, not at Caleb, but at Vito. "You don't walk away from me." She fired a long burst. The bullets chased him across the floor. Vito stumbled, a sound like a wet cough punching from his chest. A dark stain bloomed high on his shoulder, spreading rapidly. He staggered, his hand flying to the wound, but he didn't stop. He kept running, his eyes locked on Stella as Caleb hauled her back into the shadows of the theater. The multiplex theater was a graveyard. The air was thick with the smell of wet carpet, old mold, and the faint, sweet rot of decades-old soda syrup. Caleb did not stop in the lobby. He dragged Stella by the arm, his fingers digging into her bicep, pulling her through a set of double doors and into a cavernous theater. He shoved her, hard. She stumbled, tripping over a ripped-out seat, and fell backward against the massive silver screen. It was torn near the bottom, the fabric stiff and dusty. He advanced on her, the beam of his tactical flashlight cutting through the oppressive dark, pinning her like an insect. He raised his handgun, his hand steady, his arm locked. "This is where it ends. Stella," he panted, the sound echoing in the empty, decaying space. You see what you made me do. All I ever wanted was for you to be safe, for you to be home." He stepped closer, his face a mask of twisted self-pity. "I did everything for you, for us. You don't understand the things I've had to do, the pressure. Men in this field, we have to be strong. We have to make the hard choices." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "You just had to trust me. You just had to be quiet." Stella's back was flat against the screen, the rough material scratching her. She could smell his sweat, the adrenaline rolling off him. She was buying time. Vito was coming. He was wounded, but he was coming. "Like you were strong with that nurse." "Caleb," she said, her voice shaking but finding a thread of steel. "Or the night you told me you loved me, right before you smashed my laptop because I asked about your bank account. Was that a hard choice?" "You," he hissed. "Never, ever. Listen." He slammed his free hand against the screen next to her head. He fumbled in his vest, pulling out a small, square body camera. He clicked it on. A tiny red light glowed, a single malevolent eye in the dark. "You're going to fix this. You're going to fix it right now." He pulled out his phone, angled the screen so she could read the text. "You're going to read this, a confession. You're going to tell the camera and the Bix agents listening outside exactly what happened, how Vito Romano, the Mafia boss, kidnapped you and Lily, how he forced you to steal the drive, how he threatened to kill you both." The barrel of his gun pressed under her jaw, forcing her chin up. "Read it, Stella. Make it believable. You're the victim. You've always been the victim." Her eyes scanned the words. This was his endgame. "My name," she began, her voice a reedy, terrified whisper, "is Stella Turner. I was taken from my home." She forced a sob. He promised me sanctuary at his safe house on the pier." She loaded the words, keywords she knew Vito's team would recognize. He said he would burn the truth to protect me." Then she stopped, letting out a sharp, choked laugh. Caleb's face contorted. "What's funny? Read it." "It won't work," she whispered. "The drive. You don't even know what's on it." "I know it's the end of my career. It's the end of you," she shot back, a sudden, cold fury replacing her fear. "It's not just the money. Caleb, it's not just the nurse you bragged about. It's the file labeled Blackwater Ridge, the interrogation room, the one you set up in the basement." His grip on the gun faltered. "You're lying." "Am I?" Stella said, pushing. "It's a 30-second clip, a teenage witness from the docks. You beating him, trying to get him to sign a false affidavit against Romano. You broke his jaw on camera." Her voice dropped. "You release that drive. You're not a hero agent. You're a federal abuser. You'll be in a cell for 20 years. She delivered the final killing blow. And only Vito has the secure channel to scrub that file before the drive's dead man switch uploads it to the central server. You kill him. That video goes public. You're finished. She saw it, the hesitation, the core of his being. His desperate need to be seen as the hero, the good guy, was at war with his trigger finger. What a very pathetic and very boring complication. The voice, cold and accented, came from the theater entrance. Zoya Krall stood there, flanked by two of her remaining men. Her face was grim, her uniform covered in dust. "I am tired of this game. I am just here to clean up, kill them both." In the split second that Caleb's head turned toward the new threat, Stella moved. She saw a dark object on the floor in the aisle, a handgun, dropped by one of Zoya's men in the atrium chaos. She didn't dive for the gun. She dove behind a row of ripped-out velvet seats. Zoya's men opened fire. "Get her!" Caleb roared, firing back at Zoya. Stella scrambled, her hand closing over the cold, heavy steel of the dropped pistol. She didn't stand. She didn't aim at Zoya or at Caleb. She aimed up. There was one large, buzzing, fluorescent light fixture on the ceiling that was still miraculously working. She fired once, twice. The light exploded, showering the room in glass. The theater was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. It was instantaneous chaos. "Get the lights!" Zoya screamed in a language Stella didn't understand. A burst of automatic fire lit up the room in strobes, bullets shredding the movie screen. Caleb shouted, "Stella, you bitch!" and fired blindly toward where he had last seen her. Stella was already moving, crawling, her lungs burning with the smell of mold and cordite. This was the cabin. This was the night in the forest. This was her world. A massive shadow blocked the dim, green exit light from the lobby. "Zoya!" Vito's voice was a ragged roar. One of Zoya's men turned toward the sound. The shadow raised a pistol. 3 flashes. Pop, pop, pop. The soldier collapsed. Vito staggered into the room, a dark mass of determination. He was holding his chest and shoulder with one hand, his weapon in the other. He was losing blood, and he was unsteady on his feet. He raised his gun, trying to find a target in the blackness. A brilliant, white beam of light sliced through the dark. It came from the center of the theater. Caleb had a weapon light. The beam swept the room, frantic, then locked on. It landed squarely on Vito's chest, illuminating the massive, spreading bloodstain. Caleb's arm was outstretched, his aim steady. He had his target, the world compressed to a single, white-hot second. Caleb's light was on Vito. Zoya, seeing her opportunity, lunged from the darkness, not at Caleb, but at Stella, her hand reaching to grab her as a human shield, but Caleb was faster. His obsession was singular. He wasn't going to let Zoya take his prize. He pivoted, not from Vito, but to Zoya, and fired twice. "She's mine," he roared. The bullet struck Zoya in the chest. A look of complete, utter surprise crossed her face as she crumpled to the ground, her Eastern European accent silenced, her grand plan to hijack the deal ending in a filthy theater aisle. Caleb turned his gun, his light finding Vito again, but Stella was already there. She had moved in the split second of his turn, closing the distance. He was focused on the man at the door, not the woman at his feet. As his arm came back around, Stella rose up. She didn't grab for the gun. She did exactly what Vito had taught her in the concrete basement. She drove her thumb into the nerve cluster on the inside of Caleb's wrist and slammed her weight down, collapsing the joint. An inhuman scream of pain tore from Caleb's throat. His finger, tensing in agony, clenched the trigger. The gun fired, but the shot went wild. Straight up, it struck the main pipe of the theater's fire suppression system. For a moment, there was a groan. Then, with a concussive bang, the pipe ruptured. A deluge of cold, black, stagnant water exploded from the ceiling. It wasn't a sprinkle. It was a waterfall. instantly drenching everything. The world dissolved into a nightmare of noise and water. Caleb's weapon light died as it was submerged, his body camera, shorting out, gave a pathetic fizz. Zoya's men, their earpieces sparking, shouted in confusion. The dark, which had been Stella's ally, now became her shield again, this time with the added chaos of a freezing, blinding downpour. Through the roar of the water, Stella heard new shouts. "Move, move, boss! We have a signal!" A phalanx of men in black tactical gear. Vito's men burst in through the main doors, their red dot sights cutting through the cascading water. They were following the tracker. The small silver pendant around Stella's neck. Owen Creed was at their head. He saw Zoya's remaining men, disoriented by the water, and his team moved with brutal efficiency, neutralizing them in seconds. He saw Caleb, clutching his broken wrist, scrambling away, back toward the lobby. Owen didn't hesitate. He broke from the main group, pursuing him. Stella ignored them all. She ran to the door, to the shadow that had fallen. Vito was slumped against the door frame, his gun on the floor. He was soaked, his chest and shoulder a ruin of dark, wet fabric and blood. His eyes, though, were open. They were fixed on her. This was the moment she could run, chase Caleb, finish it, or she could stay. She could stay with the man who had stumbled, bleeding, into a theater for her niece. The choice wasn't a choice at all. She fell to her knees in the cascading water, her hands going to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Medic," she screamed, her voice raw. "We need a medic, now!" But she didn't just hold him. Even as she pressed her hands to his chest, her eyes darted to the side. In the lobby, she had seen it a maintenance computer terminal, its green power light still on, shielded from the water by an overhang, with one hand still on Vito. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the hard drive. "Hold on," she whispered to him. She scrambled to the terminal, the drive in her hand. It was a risk, but it was the only way. She jammed the USB into the port. The screen flickered. A prompt. Vito had given her the access code. She typed. A window opened. FCCB BIC secure portal. Romano override. She hit execute. In the parking lot, Owen Creed had Caleb on his knees, the BICs and FCCB tactical teams. The ones Caleb had staged as his rescuers were closing in, their weapons raised. "Agent Rourke," one of them shouted. "Stand down, what is this?" Caleb, nursing his broken wrist, spat on the ground. "Do your job. This is a Mafia firefight. He nodded at Owen. "Is the enemy. Arrest him." "Sir." The agent began, confused. Then his earpiece crackled. A new voice, a panicked tech agent in the command van. "Sir, you need to see this. All of you. Now, the main server. We're getting a direct feed." Inside the command van and on the tactical screens of every agent's tablet, the video file played. Caleb, taking the suitcase. Caleb, bragging about the cleanup of the nurse. And finally, the 30-second clip from the Blackwater Ridge basement, Caleb in his FCCB jacket, striking the teenage witness, his voice a snarl. "You will sign the affidavit. You will say you saw Romano. You will say it." Back in the parking lot, the lead agent's face went from confusion to stone-cold fury. He looked at the video on his tablet, then at the hero agent kneeling on the asphalt. The other agents, seeing the same feed, slowly, deliberately, turned their weapons inward, away from Owen and toward Caleb. "Caleb Rourke," the BICS commander said, his voice like ice. "On your feet. You are under arrest for conspiracy, aggravated assault, and violation of federal code." Owen lowered his weapon. Stella had done it. She hadn't just won. She had immolated him with his own fire. A few days later, the Romano Pier was quiet. Vito lay in the medical wing, his shoulder and chest heavily bandaged. Stella sat by his bed, her hand holding his. "You should have gone after him," he said, his voice rough from the painkillers. "No, I shouldn't have," she said quietly. She traced the line of his uninjured hand. "I wasn't running anymore. Vito, I was in that theater, and I wasn't his victim, and I wasn't a fugitive. I was just there, and I chose." He looked at her, his dark eyes no longer cold, searching her face. He saw the truth of it, and the resolve in her gaze moved him more than any bullet ever could. Life settled. Lily rescued, recovered, and remarkably unfazed, resumed her online classes, now with a permanent, high-speed connection and a young, adoring Romano guard as her personal tutor. Stella found her own place. She took over the small, dusty office of the foundation Vito had started years ago and ignored the Rosa Romano Foundation. She funneled her anger, her intelligence, and her experience into it, turning it into a well-funded, lethal weapon aimed at helping women and children escape men who use their authority badges, money, or power to terrorize them. One early winter evening, she was on the rooftop greenhouse, watching the first snowflakes of the season melt on the warm glass. Vito, a new, angry scar visible at the collar of his shirt, came up behind her. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he held out his hand. In his palm was a single key. Not to a guest room. It was heavy. Electronic. "Penthouse," he said. "It's empty. It's been empty." He met her gaze. "Stay. Not because you owe me. Not because you're scared. Stay because this is home." Stella looked at the key, then back at his face. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips. She took the key, her fingers closing around his. "I choose you," she said, using the words she had never been able to say to Caleb. He pulled her in, and the kiss was slow, deep, and final. It held no desperation, no fear, no adrenaline. It was just peace, below, in the main kitchen. Lily was laughing at a joke with the young guard, but she glanced up, saw the two silhouettes on the balcony, and smiled, turning back to her game. Stella in his arms. Looked out at the river. If he hadn't knocked on that cabin door, she thought, if he hadn't come for his property, she would have never known that love could feel so safe. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to connect with you, so please comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories and like this video for more. Please support us by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.